Hello, my name is Jesse Romero. I want to invite you to the 2023 Men's Conference with who? The Romero Brothers. You're going to hear some inspirational, orthodox, full contact Catholicism men's conference with the Romero Brothers. God bless you. Keep the faith.
I thought, hey, why not plug one of my books? I already plugged one of them, actually, in the intro. And that is the Hostile Witnesses, which is put out by Catholic Answers Press. This is a book, I think it's selling fine, but it's one of those books that I thought would revolutionize apologetics. And I still think it does. But it's certainly not, it's not going to make it in the top 10 New York bestseller list. But just in case you're not familiar with it, what I did was I had an entire book which focuses not on primary source material in terms of explicit testimony about Christian or Catholic doctrine. You could get that at any apologetic work out there, right? It'll be filled with New Testament. It'll be filled with early church father quotes and arguments for the truth of Catholicism. That's been done, and the whole genre of apologetic writings covers it. But through the years, what I noticed was that the enemies of the church would often make these kind of backhanded compliments to Catholicism. In other words, they would make charges against the Catholic faith or try to explain away certain facts of history. And I thought, wow, that is really powerful evidence. And you don't normally see that. Maybe every now and then you will. But bringing in hostile witnesses as proof, I think, is stellar, evidence for the faith. Because, number one, they're hostile to the faith. So they really have they have no motivation whatsoever to be lying or fabricating something to promote Catholicism. Okay. Obviously. I quote Muslims, I quote Nazis, I quote all sorts of people in the book. None of them were friends of Catholicism. That being said, but nevertheless, they run into a fact of history or something that they just can't deny. It's something that everybody apparently knows about. And so the best they can do is try to explain it away or turn it into some sort of insult against Christianity. And so in my book, that's what I do. And that's why when I was talking about Athenagoras in the last segment, I mentioned that, he's addressing these pagan objections, but the pagan objections themselves actually point to certain Christian teachings. And I think the most interesting one is the charge of cannibalism. How in the world could Catholics be accused of cannibalism? Well, perhaps it has to do with the Eucharist, right? Because the Eucharist, we teach, is the self-same flesh and blood that of Christ Jesus. In fact, the whole Christ is there, and we consume them. And you could see where, without saying that we consume them as a sacrament, right? It could lead to misunderstandings amongst the pagans that, wow, Christians are cannibals. They eat flesh and blood. They drink blood every Sunday. And that tells you something about the teaching about the Eucharist in the early church. Athenagoras is a very early father because you don't get Baptists. Baptists don't get accused of cannibalism. Right, because they believe that the bread and grape juice that they receive every Sunday is just that, bread and grape juice. And it's like a reminder of what Jesus did on the cross and nothing more.
Well, if it's still bread and wine, why would I adore him? Why would I kneel and prostrate myself between to bread and wine?
So how in the world could you come up with cannibalism when you're just eating bread and grape juice, right? Well, obviously, Christianity was teaching something much more akin or something that would provoke pagans to misunderstand as being pagan. And actually, I show numerous pagan writings that bring this fact out. And when you take that hostile witness and you pair it with Christian teachings that we have in the early church fathers, so the positive witness, you find out they go like a hand in glove, right? Because it's like what the early church fathers were teaching at the time of, say, Anaxagoras, which, you could have Ignatius of Antioch, for example, or Justin Martyr. Justin Martyr is a contemporary, so that's even better. See what his teachings on the Eucharist is and see what the pagans thought that we taught. Put those two together, and you see it's two sides of the same coin, right? One is negative, one is positive. So that's what I do in Hostile Witnesses. Like I said, it's available at shop.catholic.com at the Catholic Answers website. If you haven't picked out and it sounds interesting to you, I highly recommend it because it's really a resource book. In fact, even after I wrote Hostile Witnesses, I read it several times. I referred to it. So I use it as a resource book. It's one of those weird books that I read that I keep referring back to over and over again because it really is just a collection of quotes and some analysis, and that's basically it. So Hostile Witnesses, and of course there is the more recent book, Revolt Against Reality, which, by the way, is a very good seller, and I think it would have been an even better seller had we been able to print it a little bit earlier. But basically what I do in that book is I trace the historic roots of the chaos that we live in today. The only way we can fix what's going on today, socially, politically, religiously, is to get a handle on the roots of the problem. And so in that book, what I do is a historic deep dive. And when I say deep dive, guys, you know me. When I say deep dive, I mean deep dive. In fact, in Revolt Against Reality, I go back all the way to the beginning at creation, and I walk you through salvation history up to the time of Christ. I highlight the blinding revelation of the incarnation, that God united himself to our human nature, which, if you truly understand all the parameters of divinity and humanity, it is mind-blowing, and it has lots of far-reaching implications that cause this tidal wave of revolutions of thought in the ancient world and revolutionized, it basically brought about Western society. Western civilization was caused by the very epicenter is the incarnation, and just working out the implications of the incarnation. So I do that. And then I also go through how you have pushback against the incarnation and how those things morph and change and eventually come to their logical conclusions, which is exactly what we're living in today. So if you're confused, or if you know somebody that is troubled about the troubling, chaotic, almost insane times we live in, Revolt Against Reality would probably be a good place to start. I think it, and I'm very happy with it. The last chapter, I give a few highlights of some possible areas where reality pushes back. And I'm pleased to say, even though the book originally was written a couple of years ago, a lot of those predictions have come true, and so I think that's good reason to believe I hit the target. My latest book, hot off the press from Emmaus Road Press. In fact, we are going to do a big opening as far as doing publications and going on shows, plugging the book. In June, it is The Gospel Truth, How You Can Know What Christ Taught. And I've already done a couple of segments on Hands-On Apologetics where I go into the book and some of the things that I argue. It is a very fascinating book. In fact, let me tell you a story that I don't know if I've told this on the air, but as you know, I teach at Homeschool Connections, which teaches middle school, high school kids apologetics. And I actually had an email from a parent whose son is a self-professed atheist. And it's interesting because when I inquired as to how this came about, it was doubts that he came across on social media concerning the truthfulness of the Gospels and our ability to know things about Jesus. And I thought, man, that's exactly what my book is about. And I know that he's not alone. In fact, that's why I wrote the book. Now, kind of like Hostile Witnesses, there is one side of the story that has been out there, and there's tons of great books on the vindication, the truthfulness, the reliability of the New Testament. Okay, a lot of material out there. Almost all of it's done by evangelical Protestants. I could probably count on my one hand things that were published by Catholic apologists vindicating the Gospels. Okay, so there's not a lot of Catholic material, but there's a lot of great Protestant material that vindicates the Gospels. The problem is that when they try to vindicate the Gospels, they try to vindicate the text alone. You know, it's almost like they want to affirm the New Testament Gospels by themselves as if they kind of sprang into existence from a vacuum. And because of that, they lose their ability to demonstrate why we should believe the Gospels are true, or the veracity of the Gospels. And since they're having trouble, since they can't do that without acknowledging the presence of the church, they run into huge problems. And a lot of non-believers, many of them are former Protestant, they see right through it, right? They see that, just trying to establish all the bona fides of the Gospels is impossible unless you take into account that Christianity is a real community of believers who witnessed the same thing and confirmed that what was written is true. You know, you need to do that. And evangelical scholarship is kind of being pushed in that level. But the problem is they don't want to affirm that, because by affirming it, they're consequently affirming sacred tradition, which they deny in principle.
Emotional damage.
So they won't go down that road. So in the Gospel Truth, I do go down that road. And not only do I show that you can demonstrate the reliability of the Gospels, but lots of other things, like how do we know the text that we have is true? Or how do you know which books belong in the Bible? All of that follows the same method. All right, so I hear the music coming up. We'll stop right there. You're listening to Hands On Apologetics, and we'll be right back.